Welcome to the Atheist in Recovery podcast, where we talk about finding hope in recovery. And now your host, Dr. Adina Silvestri.
Hello, guys, and welcome to episode 42 of the Atheists in Recovery podcast. And today is a solo episode. Today we are talking about 5 ways to connect with your therapist online. But before we go into my 5 ways to connect, I wanted to share with you a link that I received today, and it's really fun. It's so much fun. It's depicting the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony via a cartoon rendition of 2 tiny bicyclists riding up and down. And it's in conjunction with the music. It's awesome. It's so great. And so why am I telling you all this? Well, I'm telling you this because I'm recording this and then we're still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I want to remind you that joy is an essential component in our resilience. It's so important. I'm going to actually link to an episode I did regarding music in recovery, and I'll link to that in the show notes. But music just can transcend us, right, to another space, another time, another feeling. You know, I think it does so much for us. And so I wanted to start the conversation by talking about my Beethoven Symphony bicyclists and just kind of remind you guys that we need to remember to laugh. It's so difficult to be upset and experience emotional distress when you're laughing at the same time. Just like it's incredibly difficult to be upset and crying and dance at the same time. Have you ever tried to cry and dance at the same time? You can't do it. So I hope that there's a lot more bicyclists riding to Beethoven and dance in your life. Okay. Let's get on to the show here. Okay. 5 ways to connect with your therapist online. So I've been moving to online therapy, as many of you know, or maybe not know. Everyone's moving to online therapy, and therapy doesn't have to stop when you're at home. So perhaps you're anxious about going to therapy. Perhaps you're thinking, I think I'm just going to put this on pause until this blows over. I think you might want to reconsider. And it doesn't have to be just for therapy. I mean, it could be for anything that you gain a lot of insight from. It could be your recovery coach. It could be maybe you subscribe to a certain community that used to have in-person meetings. Maybe it was a recovery community that had in-person meetings and now they're online. It shouldn't stop you from joining. And so let's talk about how to make the most out of your experience. So if you've never started therapy before, you should definitely call your insurance carrier and ask them to find a therapist in your state that accepts your insurance. And if you're looking for groups, there are a bunch of national recovery groups that I am going to link to again in the show notes. And then also your community is a great support. If you're not asking for yourself, you could say that you're asking for a friend, but ask the people in your community on Facebook or Instagram, who do they recommend for therapy? I also found a resource for people that are working on the front lines, anyone in the healthcare profession. There's a couple of therapists. One is a colleague of mine who started this free or low-cost online therapy group. And so I will link to that. And you could search for a free or low-cost therapist in your area as long as you are a frontline worker. So that's pretty cool. So if you decide you want to try therapy, virtual therapy for the first time with your current therapist or recovery coach, or maybe you want to try it with somebody new, let's get started on these 5 tips. Number 1, schedule a session when you know you have time to yourself. This is really important. For a lot of people, they would only be able to do therapy in person in the evening because they worked, right? And maybe they needed a sitter or it just wasn't working. And so it's really hard to find a therapist in the evening. I should know. However, now people's schedules are a little bit lighter. And so therapists are more available and they could help you. They could work with you more in the evenings. And So don't make that a barrier to finding someone. And if you don't have quiet time, get creative. I've had people talk to me in their car, which I guess isn't that creative, but I've also had people talk to me in their walk-in closet. And so wherever you could find that extra privacy, that's where you want to go. Number 2. Find a spot where you are most comfortable. If you've been stuck inside and sheltering in place like we all have, do some movement. I do this a lot with the younger children that I see. I make them do some exercise with me, mostly because I'm just sick of standing or sitting or whatever I'm doing for long periods of time. So get on an exercise ball, stretch while you're talking to your therapist. Let them know that's what you're doing. They'll probably join in with you. Increase those feel-good hormones, and that'll really prime you for a good session. Or maybe the spot that you're most comfortable is in your bed. Maybe you're lying down. I see some teens in my practice, and so quite often they are laying in bed and they have their computer propped up. Maybe that's when you're the most vulnerable, and that's when you're going to get a really good session. Okay, number 3, don't worry about appearances. Well, yeah, don't worry about them. A lot of individuals dress up to see their therapist because that's just the normal progression of their day. They go to work, they go to therapy after work. It's just part of their professional day. But for virtual therapy, it's okay to dress down. Let that hair down. Dress in clothing that's light and comfortable. And a pro tip, try to make sure that you're lit directly from the front so that your therapist can see you. That really makes the nonverbals a little bit easier to see. And as therapists, we look for the nonverbals probably a lot more than we look for the verbal communication. So, all right, number 4, avoid distractions. Set your phone to silent. Close all of those noise-making apps. This is your time, and act as if you are sitting in the same room as your therapist or recovery professional. Okay, make that time sacred. Number 5, ground yourself. Right before your session, maybe you hit the yoga mat for some deep breathing, or you turn on your favorite meditation app. I really love Headspace. If laughing is on the agenda, maybe you look at that little Beethoven clip that is in the show notes that I'm going to have for you guys. Or try listening to Paul Rudd's new hilarious season on Audible. It's bookmarked. I haven't listened to it yet, but the preview looks really funny. It can be challenging. So right now, you're probably navigating a bunch of different roles. So your mom, maybe the CEO of your company, your wife, and you're all navigating this, doing all of these things in your kitchen table, right? And so you have to have a little bit of transitional space. And so you want the time that you were to have prepped for a therapy session or an inner self session would have been on the drive. I hear pretty often in my practice people that say to me, well, on the way over here in my car, I thought of this, and this to talk about today. And so they're really just sort of transitioning from work or home life to doing this important inner work. And you don't have that luxury right now. And so I tell my clients that we're going to do some diaphragmatic or belly breathing before we start. Or sometimes I take them through a short meditation before we start. And they seem to like that. But do whatever feels good for you. Maybe you go on a good walk. I love going on walks in between whatever I have going on throughout the day. Or maybe you try a journaling app to help ground you. And I'll link to that also in the show notes. Okay, so guys, remember you don't have to choose between leaving your home and tending to your mental and emotional health. Your recovery is too important. Your recovery and you are worth it. So talk to your virtual therapy provider. And I am going to leave you with those 5 tips for today. I probably could go on and on. And also, I want to remind you that we have a newsletter. Atheists in Recovery has a weekly Sunday newsletter that I send out. And if you haven't subscribed to it yet, you can subscribe by following the link in the show notes or going to adinasilvestri.com/atheists-in-recovery. I need to shorten that, and sign up to be on the mailing list. And again, it's just a short Sunday newsletter. And I've really been trying to up the laughter quotient since this pandemic started. I wonder if you guys have noticed that or not. But okay, guys, thanks so much for listening. Have a great one. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Atheists in Recovery podcast. For more great info and to stay up to date, head over to atheistsInRecovery.com.